All right, let's go ahead and get started. We got bell work, word of the day. I want to discuss your naturalist observation assignment. Turn those in here in just a moment as well. And then we're going to transition away from research methods, and we're going to start our section. It's really 3 days in a row here, talking about psych perspectives. There's about 10 to 12 altogether. And there's some assignment in the mix that we're going to start working on next week. What I want you to keep it in the back of your mind as we go through our notes today over the next 3 days. Sound good? 8 ethical guidelines. List them and talk about each one for a moment here. Ms. Wiegand, you got one? Legality. It's got to follow the law, right? Can't break the law just for the good of science. Can't do that. Sarah. It's got to be institutionally improved. If you're going to do something here at the school, got to have the school board, administration on board, right? What else, Logan?
Informed consent.
Informed consent. The subject of your research have to give their okay. Good. Callie? You gotta use. You can use deception only when. Only when what? Whenever you feel like the information will skew the outcome of the research, their behavior will be affected because they know what's going on. So you can deceive, but only in that particular situation. Okay? That's 4. We're halfway there. Mr. Knapp? Debriefing, right? I always laugh whenever we get to debriefing. A little immature. I have 2 boys, right? We talk about debriefing quite a bit. But debriefing is simply at the conclusion of experiment, what do? You tell them. Yes, you share them the results, and you share with them the truth if they were deceived in that particular research study, so that you make sure that everything is resolved. Don't let them. Who is that psychologist that did that research on little Albert? Anybody remember what his name was? Yeah, Mr. Beckendorf. Hawthorne is another name we threw out yesterday. Watson's the guy's name. John B. Watson, right? So don't be like John B. Watson in that particular case, in which he let that guy go, little Albert, right, without debriefing him there. So how many is that now? Is that 5 or 6? I lost track. Put my hands down. That's 5? Okay. So we got 3 more. Mr. Flanagan?
We do informed consent.
And we did?
Publication.
Say it again?
Publication.
Publication. So after you get your research concluded, you need to share it with other professionals so that they can try to replicate what you did. Right? We should have 2 more. Logan got another one? Yep, can't be excessive. Right? Can't be excessive. Otherwise it'll affect the outcome. And last one, Mr. Hunter? Subordinates. Can't use subordinates in your research. Otherwise, you could hold some form of authority over them that would skew their behavior. So teachers can't use students, or professors can't use their students in their own research there. Okay? Any questions about the 8 ethical guidelines? We're good there? All right, let's go ahead and put that off the side. Get your word of the day out. So last week we did simple sentences. This week we're doing compound sentences. I want to share with you simply the outline of common mistake associated with compound sentences. Okay, now, I know I just have squiggly lines up on the board, but we're going to assume that this is a complete sentence, an independent clause that could stand by itself, right? With a compound sentence, what we're going to do is we're going to add a comma at the end, replace the period with a comma. Then we're going to put a conjunction in there. In our environment here in class, I want to limit the conjunctions. You got 3 to choose from. We're going to simplify it so that we stay away from mistakes. And, or but, are the 3 conjunctions that you can choose from this week. Sound good? With your compound sentences. Some students, they start to throw in the word because as a conjunction. Try to use it as a conjunction. But they unknowingly turn it from a compound sentence into, really, it's a fragment on the other end. It becomes a phrase and not a complete sentence. So they make a mistake there. So and, or, but with our conjunction, and then another independent clause, a sentence that could stand on its own. Another common mistake is students will put subject verb on this side, and then they won't identify the subject on this side. right? They just say it's inferred. They don't put it there, and they only put the verb on this side, so it really becomes a fragment, shortened phrase. Okay, so that's not a complete, and that's not a compound sentence. So it's subject verb with a comma conjunction in the middle. Okay. Capricious is our word of the day today. First synonym, unpredictable. Antonym, predictable. Because of his capricious nature, George found it hard to keep a steady job. Other synonyms other than unpredictable. Yes, that's what it is. Changing. Good. Changing. Logan. Random. Good. Erratic. Part of speech. Lindy? Good guess. Want to guess again?
No.
Good try. You'll guess again? It is an adjective, descriptive word. George is being described as capricious. Antonyms. So he's predictable. He is what? Yes.
Consistent.
He's consistent. Very good. He's consistent. He is what? Ms. Munson?
Not constant.
He's a constant, right? Very good. He is constant. Unchanging. All right. Our sentence context today. We're actually going to watch a short video. It's about visualization. I am big on visualization. Chapter 1. Power of thought. All right. Let's take a moment and watch this real
For
quick.
years, scientists believed that the brain was static, unchanging, and long, but our understanding has changed drastically to the point where we now see the brain as plastic and constantly changing. But what if I told you that simply thinking could affect not only the way your brain works, but its physical shape and structure as well? It turns out this is exactly what happens. From a neuroscientific standpoint, imagining an action and doing it require the same motor and sensory programs in the brain. For example, if you were to close your eyes and imagine the letter B, the primary visual cortex lights up in the same way it does when you look at the letter on the screen. Take a moment and imagine yourself writing out your signature with your dominant hand. Chances are, the amount of time it takes you to simply imagine doing it is similar to how long it actually takes to write it out. Try doing the same thing with your non-dominant hand and it actually takes you longer to write and imagine. How is this relevant? Well, because imagination and action are actually integrated and engage the same neural pathways, practicing one actually influences the other. One fascinating study took two groups and had them practice piano for 2 hours a day, except one group was only allowed to use mental practice. They couldn't touch the piano, but would sit in front of it and imagine practicing. The surprising result? The exact same physical changes took place in the motor cortex of both groups. And after 3 days, their accuracy in playing was the exact same. Beyond 5 days, the physical practice group did begin to excel faster, but the imagination group, when given the chance to practice physically, was able to catch up to their skill level quickly. Perhaps more incredible is an experiment which used imagination in an effort to strengthen muscles. Both groups did the same finger muscle exercises for 4 weeks, though one group simply did it mentally. Those who actually did the physical exercise increased their strength by 30%, while those who imagined doing it increased their muscle strength by 22%. This is because the neurons responsible for the movement instruction were still being used and strengthened, resulting in increased strength when the muscles actually contracted. So, while your thoughts don't have some mystical or magical power, mental practice is an effective way to prepare for a physical skill. Each thought actually changes the structure and function of your brain by affecting the neurons at the microscopic level. Though, as much as we wish you could sit there and become the next Mozart, it won't happen without a lot of hard physical work. But a little imagination never hurts. This episode.
All right. So, a couple words. It talks about the brain is constantly changing. So there's a term that I want you to maybe write out to the side here. Take a mental note of it because we'll refer back to it over and over this semester. It begins with the P. Did anybody pick up on the P word that they were throwing out a couple times? They said that the brain is always adapting and changing. It is what? Plastic. And plastic is a reference to plasticity. So just add the ity on the end. Plasticity. So I used another P word to try to help us understand plasticity, like Play-Doh, right? Like a little kid plays with Play-Doh, so you can mold it, shape it, adapt it. Your brain is kind of like that, right? It's not fixed. It's not stagnant, right? Based off of the things that you do, the activities that you get involved in, learning experiences that you have, your brain is constantly changing and adapting. It's plasticity. It's plastic, okay? Question?
Did you hear just that made me think of the MIT researcher that used the neuron firing from your brain to the muscles in your jaw to create a device that when you thought about saying words, it could translate it through a computer?
And so it creates the response to it.
Yeah.
Wasn't there that guy that did all this research on time travel? Doesn't he use a device like that? Like he's not able to speak.
No, he uses his eyes.
He uses his eyes. So this is something that's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's like
All right.
it's like a headset, and it like reads the muscle stimulation and the neurons firing,
Uh-huh.
and it like translates that into like speech.
Some fascinating stuff there. Fascinating stuff. A couple more things real quick. We got the 4 goals of psychology. What are those? What are the 4 goals again? Description, explanation, prediction, and influence. This video here, which one of those 4 goals is most closely reflected or best reflected in this particular video? What is it doing? Influence? Possibly. There's a better answer though. It's description. It's describing what is going on so that you have a better understanding of this concept of visualization. Now, you can take this concept and then apply it to a certain context, right? And we try to do that a lot. In baseball, we have this rule, before each and every pitch is a pitcher, we do 3 things. We exhale, visualize, positive self-thought. So visualization is in the mix there, right? We have to think and imagine in our brain, we have this like esoteric kind of approach where we are looking down at ourselves and we want to visualize, imagine ourselves going through our delivery and seeing the baseball leave our hand and seeing the result that we want, where the baseball goes where we want it to go before we even deliver that pitch, right? So we try to do that over and over and over again. And in the course of a ball game, you've got 150 pitches, 130, 150 pitches. That means you're flexing your mental muscles, if you're doing it the right way, over and over again. So mentally, you should be taxed by the end of the ball game if you're actually doing this stuff, okay? So the first time I was exposed to this idea, they had us doing some visualization stuff where we were supposed to picture like green baseballs, blue baseballs, yellow baseballs, and we're supposed to move them around in our head. And I was in this room with like 20 other, 20-year-old males, and we were looking at each other and like, this is crazy stuff, where's the door? I'm going to leave. This is nuts. But when you look at the research behind it, there's some crazy stuff that shows the success of visualization and how advantageous it is. Okay? So it works for multiple things. Athletics is one. Even academics, you visualize yourself having success in an assessment type of environment. It's good stuff there. Sound good? All right, use that as our sentence context. Visualization, compound sentence. Make sure you got capricious in our sentence. Sound good? Once you're finished, you can share it with the person in front and the person behind you. All right, Josh, what you got?
For my sentence?
Yep.
I said, because he was so capricious, nobody knew how to approach me.
Because he was so capricious, nobody knew how to approach him. All right, so that's good use of capricious in sentence, but you've got a fragment. It's really a complex sentence rather than a compound sentence. So you would have to add another phrase at the end. Nobody knew how to approach him, but things change. You could do something as simple as that, right? Things change. It could be an independent clause. All right, not bad. Let's go ahead and take out a sheet of notebook paper, put our Chromebooks away for a moment. We're going to take a few notes today on psychology's roots, meaning that we're going to get introduced to the three earliest psych perspectives today. The founding father of psychology, a couple other psychologists, and three perspectives associated with it, okay? Now, I want to show you where these notes are. Sometimes I go through them fairly quickly. Students want to go back and get everything written down. They feel like that's the ultimate goal, note-taking, which really isn't. But if you go to Chapter 1, the website, Chapter 1 here, over here on the right-hand side, it's got everything linked. It's just exploring psychology's roots, the slides here, right? In addition to that, what I do, like I'm doing right now, is recording, and so I usually put those under this section here. You've got a lot of them right now. Some of this stuff is from last semester, but it's already up there. Sound good? So you got the audio associated with them as well, if you like. Okay? Let's go back. Right. Who's the guy that did this study on observational learning, modeling? Mr. What is that?
Bandura.
Very good, Mr. Merritt. Albert Bandura. And which goal of psychology did we say that was? Or which, well, I guess, which goal? I guess it would be more of a description of what's going on. What research method, what descriptive research method would we classify this as? What's our 4 descriptive research methods? Remember those? Yes, Ms. Lindy?
Naturalistic observation, laboratory observation, case study, and survey.
And survey, very good. So which of those 4 would this one be? It'd be a laboratory observation, right? It's in a laboratory type setting. I know that sometimes we think of a laboratory looking a little bit different, but it's a laboratory setting, and you're just simply observing what the children do. That was actually referenced in this book that I'm reading. We're going to reference some of these things from this particular book over the course of the next couple of weeks, and maybe even more later this week as well. So when did psychology begin? The ideas of psychology goes back thousands of years, back to the Greek philosophers. However, they dabbled in some of the ideas, some of the things that they talk about, the Agora, really refer closely to some of the things that we look at in psychology today. Aspects of human behavior, aspects of the mind, right? However, psychology is not considered to be a subject area, until more recently. What had to happen before we can consider it to be a subject? Because back then, we're thinking of it more as a philosophy, right? Philosophical approach, because they didn't have something. We have to have something first in order for we can think of it as a subject area. It's the application of something. It would be the application of the scientific research method. Sound good? So these ideas of psychology and contemplating human behavior go back thousands of years. However, the study of psychology, trying to make it as objective as possible, really goes back to about the middle of the 1800s. Okay? The mid to late 1800s. And it really didn't originate here in the United States either. Right? As a subject area, as a science. These guys were some of the founding fathers. Now, we're not going to call any of these 3 the founding father. We'll get to that here in a second. But they were a part of it. You have Ernst Weber, Gustav Fechner, and Hermann von Helmholtz. All good names. All coming from what country? Germany. All right. So you have more of a European, German origin for the scientific subject area of psychology. Sound good? So these early psychologists, a lot of times what they were experts in physics for the most part, chemistry, okay? And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind because these early psych perspectives have a lot of close connections to the ideas of physics and chemistry. The ideas were really wrong, but it was a start. Sound good? It was a way of trying to make cognitions more objective. Okay? So this guy is considered to be our father of psychology. So it's good to know those other guys' names, Hermann von Helmholtz, but they're not going to show up necessarily on a test. Sound good? It's good to know that it originates not so much in our ethnocentric, viewpoint of the United States, but it's German origins as a subject area. But you will need to know this guy's name, Wilhelm Wundt, or Wilhelm Wundt. Okay? He is known as the father of psychology. And the reason why he's given that particular title is he's the first guy that really set up a psych laboratory. Right? You may want to write that out to the side if it's not up there. A psych laboratory. And the location is Leipzig, Germany, one of the universities there. And he was trying to objectively measure cognitions, what's going on in the mind, okay? And some of his ideas seemed a little bit strange when we look back at it today, okay? His ideas have been termed introspection. So introspection is going to be what we call our first psych perspective, okay? And the way it works is you as an individual, as a subject of his research, what you would do is you'd be exposed to a particular stimulus, and then he would ask you, what does this make you think of, right? How does this make you feel? And he would record all that information, okay? So some of the stimuli that he would expose his subjects to were really random. You guys know that thing in that instrument in music that goes back and forth and keeps track of timing? What's that called? A metronome, all right? So what he would do is he would expose his subjects to a metronome, and then he'd vary the speed. He'd slow it down, and then he'd speed it up. How does that make you feel, right? So when psychologists go back and look at it, they're like, this is extremely subjective. Not objective, it's extremely subjective, okay? Because the response of the subject is going to vary from individual to individual, right? Based on previous experiences, based on personality characteristics, it's extremely subjective. So what I want you to remember is the subjective nature of introspection, and then also I want you to remember that when Wundt died, introspection died with him, right? It was a good first attempt to try to attack this idea of studying cognitions, but it failed miserably, okay? So, Wundt had a student, and his name was Edward Titchener. You need to make sure that you know his name as well. And he's really known for this idea of structuralism. I don't think structuralism was up there. Oh, there it is. Okay? Structuralism. So, structuralism, introspection is actually a subcomponent of structuralism, but I've kind of separated them. I want you to think of them as really two different schools of thought and psych perspectives. But the way structuralism would work is Titchener was thinking that our cognitive processes, like some of our senses and perceptions, what you could do is you could break them down into certain qualities and characteristics, like water. Water, is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, right? And you have the periodic table in chemistry to help you to figure out, all these items. And so he thought that you could take that concept of the periodic table and apply it to cognitive properties, cognitions, okay? So you may want to write that down out to the side, because that's a strong connection there. Maybe write periodic table, question mark, chemistry, question mark, out to the side. You can see what they had background in chemistry and physics, and they were trying to objectify something that they couldn't really measure, all these cognitive processes, thinking, remembering, all that stuff. They were trying to objectively measure it, and they struggled with it, okay? So the reason why he's up there with structuralism, it didn't really work out very well either, but he brought psychology to the United States. Okay, so you may write that out to the side. Got Cornell University up there. He set up a psych laboratory there and brought psychology here to the United States. Sound good? I think of Andy Menard when I hear of Cornell University, if you guys are familiar with The Office. All right, so the last one. So we've got 3 psych perspectives today. We've got introspection with Wundt, extremely subjective. Okay, and then you have structuralism with Titchener, which really didn't work because cognitions aren't made up of properties like chemistry and water. The example of water there. And then you get to another guy named Bill James or William James. And he's the guy that came up with this concept of functionalism. So again, this is the late 1800s and early 1900s. And functionalism is a much different approach than the previous 2. And it sticks, right? William James's ideas are still hanging around today, over 100 years later. Sound good? There's a number of psychologists that are referenced in this, and James has been referenced multiple times. Okay, multiple times in this text that just came out within the past 5 years. Okay, and other psychologists are mentioned in here for negative reasons. He's mentioned in there for positive reasons. Okay, so his ideas have lasted quite a bit. So functionalism is really based upon trying to answer these questions: how do mental processes function? You can't necessarily, we can't observe the makeup of the cognition in it itself, like Titchener wanted to do with structuralism. So let's just think about how it functions in the environment around it. How do humans use mental process to adapt to their environment? Adapt to their environment is a key concept here. William James was greatly influenced by another scientist that was really, really popular in his day. Does anybody know who that would be? Thinking about this idea of adaptation to one's environment. Yep. Darwin. You may write Darwin's name out to the side. Good test question there. Who greatly influenced the development of functionalism? The answer would be Darwin. Okay. So what William James is thinking about is how do these cognitions allow us to be able to, survival of the fittest and pass down genes from one generation to the next, function within advantageously inside of our environment that we live. Okay. So there's William James. He's famous for coining a number of phrases that are popular in psychology today. One of them is this concept of stream of consciousness. Okay, and that totally contrasts what Titchener and Wundt were coming up with, the idea that this cognition plus this cognition equals this idea, this behavior. Stream of consciousness is the idea that it is constantly flowing. We have thoughts constantly flowing through our mind, even when we're sleeping as well. Okay? So how did functionalism change psychology? It broadened the scope of psychology. So you could study more than just cognitive processes. It allowed for the study of individuals that didn't have language yet. For example, like children, like young children, you could start to study them. You could study animals as well using functionalism. With introspection, you couldn't study young children because they couldn't verbalize their responses. You couldn't study, psychology with animals because they can't verbalize their responses either, right? So you're kind of limited there. And it also focused on applied psychology. Everything else was just basic research. This is more applicable and could be potentially helpful in understanding human behavior and making people's lives better. Making people's lives better there. Okay, we're going to watch a short video here to finish up. Again, it's not very long here, but it just kind of reiterates some of the things that we talked about. You've got 3 perspectives again. You've got introspection, structuralism, and now functionalism with William James. Okay?
Modern research owes a great debt to the innovations of such researchers as Wilhelm Wundt. Wundt designed the first controlled research in a lab setting, and his approach was later known as structuralism. In this setting, Wundt and his colleagues studied perception. Some experiments simply involved recording how the subject responded to sounds, or how the subject reacted to the dropping of a large rubber ball. Wundt also developed the method introspection, where he asked subjects to report their feelings and sensations after dropping the ball to the ground. Although Wundt believed that he could gain insight into how the brain works by asking subjects how they feel, this approach was criticized for being unreliable and prone to bias. His methods as a whole were often criticized for being too narrow or subjective. In 1890, William James attempted to explain how consciousness functions with his book, The Principles of Psychology. Because James's theories attempted to explain the function of consciousness rather than the structure, his approach was appropriately named functionalism. James borrowed heavily from Darwin's ideas that mental processes evolve over time to aid the overall survival of humans. Although the early psychologists may have disagreed over how to conduct research, these clashes led to improvements in the science and shaped the methods used today.
Alright, so the book on William James wrote, you may want to write that down, maybe a good test question there. The Principles of Psychology. The Principles of Psychology. Again, it's referenced still today. 1890, 2020, so it lasted quite a while.